The rain hammered against the windows of the black SUV as it weaved through the empty streets of Los Angeles. Inside, Michael Jackson sat in silence, his fedora pulled low over his eyes, his gloved hands folded in his lap. It was 3 a.m. on November 15th, 1995, and he had just finished a grueling recording session at the studio. His bodyguard sat in front, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. After years of relentless fame, Michael had learned to live in the shadows, moving through the world like a ghost. The city looked different at this hour. The neon sign flickered weakly in the downpour, and the streets that normally buzz with life were eerily deserted. Michael pressed his face against the cool glass, watching the rain streak down in endless rivers. He felt exhausted, not just physically but spiritually. The weight of being the most famous person on earth had begun to crush him in ways he never talked about publicly. Every day brought new challenges, new accusations, new reasons for the world to love him or hate him. Tonight, he just wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and forget about everything for a few precious hours. But fate had other plans. As the SUV turned onto Wilshire Boulevard, something caught Michael's attention. Through the sheets of rain, he saw a figure stumbling along the sidewalk. At first, he thought it might be a drunk person trying to find their way home, but something about the way they moved made him lean forward. The person was weaving erratically, reaching out to grab lampposts and parking meters to stay upright. Then, without warning, the figure collapsed onto the wet pavement. Michael's heart jumped. "Stop the car," he said quietly. His head bodyguard, Marcus, glanced at him in the rearview mirror with concern. "Mr. Jackson, we should keep moving. It's not safe to stop here." Michael shook his head firmly. "I said stop the car." There was a tone in his voice that Marcus had learned never to question. The SUV pulled over to the curb, its headlights illuminating the crumpled form on the sidewalk about 30 feet ahead. Michael opened his door before anyone could stop him. The rain immediately soaked through his jacket as he stepped onto the street. Marcus and the other bodyguard, James, jumped out after him, their hands instinctively moving to their concealed weapons. "So, please get back in the vehicle," Marcus urged, but Michael was already walking toward the fallen person. As he got closer, he could see it was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, lying face down in a puddle. Her clothes were soaked through, and her dark hair spread out around her head like seaweed. Michael knelt beside her, ignoring the cold water seeping through his pants. He gently turned her over, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Her lips were blue, her skin was pale as moonlight, and there were track marks running up her arms. She wasn't breathing. Without hesitation, Michael placed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. There it was, faint and irregular, barely perceptible beneath her icy skin. She was alive, but barely. "Call an ambulance now." Michael shouted over his shoulder. James was already pulling out his phone, but Michael knew they didn't have time to wait. He had taken CPR classes years ago as part of his first aid training, something he insisted all his staff do as well. He tilted her head back, checked her airway, and began rescue breathing. 1 breath, 2 breaths, then he started chest compressions. The rain pounded down on them both as he worked, counting under his breath. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Marcus stood over them like a shield, his eyes darting around nervously. They were completely exposed out here. Anyone could recognize Michael Jackson kneeling in the rain, trying to save someone's life. The headlines would be brutal, the speculation endless. But Michael didn't care about any of that. All he could think about was this young woman who was slipping away right in front of him. She was someone's daughter, maybe someone's sister or friend. She mattered. After what felt like an eternity but was probably less than a minute, the woman suddenly gasped and began coughing violently. Michael quickly turned her onto her side as she vomited rainwater and bile onto the pavement. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She looked up at him through the rain, and for a brief second, their eyes met. Even in her altered state, Michael could see recognition dawn on her face, followed immediately by disbelief. "Yo!" She whispered hoarsely, but before she could finish, her eyes rolled back and she passed out again. Michael checked her pulse once more. It was stronger now, more steady. She was breathing on her own. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder with each passing second. The ambulance was coming. James knelt beside Michael and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did it, sir. You saved her life." Michael didn't respond. He just stayed there in the rain, one hand resting protectively on the woman's shoulder, making sure she kept breathing until help arrived. The ambulance screeched to a halt beside them, and paramedics jumped out with a stretcher and medical equipment. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking her vital signs, starting in four-line, loading her onto the stretcher. One of the paramedics, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked at Michael with a mixture of shock and admiration. "Are you the one who performed CPR?" Michael nodded. "You saved this girl's life tonight." Another few minutes and she would have been gone. As they loaded the woman into the ambulance, one of the paramedics turned back to Michael. "We need a name for our report. Who should we say found her?" Michael hesitated. He looked at Marcus, then at James, then back at the paramedic. "Just say a concerned citizen," he said quietly. "That's all you need to know." The paramedic studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, a concerned citizen it is." The ambulance door slammed shut, and with lights flashing and sirens blaring, it disappeared into the rainy night. Michael stood on the sidewalk, water dripping from his clothes, his carefully styled hair plastered to his head. He watched the ambulance's tail lights fade into the distance, wondering about the young woman inside. Who was she? What had brought her to this desperate moment? Would she survive the night? These questions swirled through his mind as Marcus gently guided him back to the SUV. As they drove away, Michael turned to look back at the spot where he had found her. The rain was already washing away the evidence that anything had happened there at all. But Michael knew he would never forget this night. Something had shifted inside him, something profound and unshakable. He had looked death in the face and refused to let it win. 3 days passed before Michael allowed himself to think about the woman again. Those 72 hours were consumed by meetings, rehearsals, and the constant media circus that followed him everywhere. But late at night, when the world finally grew quiet, her pale face haunted his dreams. He would wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the feel of her cold skin beneath his hands, the terrible stillness of her chest before she took that first gasping breath. He had saved lives before through his charity work, donating millions to hospitals and children's causes. But this was different. This time he had held death at bay with his own 2 hands. On the 4th day, Michael made a decision that would change everything. He called his most trusted assistant, a sharp woman named Patricia who had been with him for nearly a decade. "I need you to find someone for me," he told her over the phone. A young woman, early 20s, admitted to a Los Angeles hospital on the night of November 15th overdose victim, found on Wilshire Boulevard around 3 in the morning. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Patricia was used to unusual requests, but this one clearly surprised her. "May I ask why, Mr. Jackson?" Michael closed his eyes. "Because I need to know if she's alive." Patricia worked her magic, making discreet phone calls and calling in favors from contacts throughout the city. By evening, she had the information Michael needed. The young woman's name was Sarah Chen, 23 years old, originally from San Francisco. She had survived the overdose and was currently in stable condition at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. She had no family in Los Angeles, no emergency contacts listed. According to the hospital records, she had been transferred from the emergency room to the psychiatric ward for evaluation. Patricia's voice grew somber as she relayed the final piece of information. "Mr. Jackson, the police report indicates this wasn't her first overdose. She's been in and out of rehab facilities for the past 2 years." Michael felt his heart sink. This beautiful young woman was trapped in a cycle of addiction and self-destruction, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to help her somehow. But he also knew the dangers of getting involved. The media would have a field day if they discovered Michael Jackson was visiting a young woman in the hospital. The speculation, the innuendo, the twisted narratives it would create would be endless and vicious. He had learned the hard way that no good deed went unpunished in the court of public opinion. Yet something stronger than fear was pulling him toward Sarah Chen. That night, Michael made another call, this time to Dr. Robert Williams, a psychiatrist he had worked with on various charitable initiatives. Dr. Williams specialized in addiction and trauma, and Michael trusted him completely. They met the next morning at a quiet coffee shop in Santa Monica, far from the places where Michael might be recognized. He wore a simple disguise, a baseball cap and sunglasses, and kept his head down as they talked. "I want to help her," Michael said after explaining the situation. "But I don't know how. I don't know if I should even try." Dr. Williams stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Michael, addiction is one of the most complex and heartbreaking conditions we deal with in medicine. The fact that you saved her life is remarkable, but saving someone once doesn't mean they're saved forever. Recovery is a long, painful process, and it only works if the person truly wants it." Michael nodded. He understood this intellectually, but his heart was telling him something different. "I can't explain it, Robert, but I feel connected to her somehow, like I was meant to be there that night." Dr. Williams leaned forward. "Then perhaps you were. Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right moment for reasons we can't fully understand. But if you're going to help this young woman, you need to be smart about it. You need protection, not just for your reputation, but for your emotional well-being. Getting involved in someone's addiction recovery is not simple, and it can become consuming." They talked for over an hour, developing a plan. Dr. Williams would reach out to the hospital, offering his services as Sarah's treating psychiatrist. Michael would remain anonymous for now, referred to only as a person who found her, if his name came up at all. 2 days later, Dr. Williams visited Sarah in the psychiatric ward. He called Michael afterward with his initial assessment. "She's fragile, Michael, deeply wounded. Her addiction started after a traumatic incident in her past, something she's been trying to escape ever since. She has no support system, no real friends, and her family disowned her after her first arrest for possession. She's alone in the world, and she's lost all hope." Michael listened in silence, his hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She keeps talking about the angel in the rain," Dr. Williams continued. "She doesn't remember much from that night, but she remembers someone holding her, breathing life back into her. She says she looked up and saw an angel's face through the rain. She doesn't know it was you." Michael felt tears prick his eyes. An angel. If only she knew how broken he felt most days, how he struggled with his own demons and doubts. But perhaps that was exactly why he understood her so deeply. They were both fighting invisible battles, both trying to survive in a world that often felt too cruel and too harsh. "Tell her the angel is real," Michael said quietly. "Tell her that the person who found her wants her to know that her life has value, that she matters, and that she deserves a second chance." Dr. Williams promised he would. Over the following weeks, Dr. Williams provided regular updates. Sarah had agreed to enter a long-term residential treatment program, something she had resisted in the past. She was attending therapy sessions, participating in group discussions, and slowly beginning to open up about the trauma that had derailed her life. Michael followed her progress with an intensity that surprised even him. He found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering if she was having a good day or a bad day, if she was staying strong or struggling with cravings. One evening, Patricia knocked on the door of Michael's home office. She looked worried. "Mr. Jackson, I think you should see this." She handed him a folder containing newspaper clippings and printouts from internet forums. His stomach dropped as he read the headlines. "Mystery Good Samaritan saves overdose victim." "Anonymous hero performs CPR on Wilshire Boulevard." The stories were vague, with no names mentioned, but several amateur detectives online were trying to piece together who the mystery person might have been. Someone had noticed the expensive SUV that had been parked at the scene. Another person claimed to have seen a tall figure in expensive clothes kneeling on the sidewalk. Marcus entered the room behind Patricia, his expression grim. "Sir, we need to talk about security protocols. If the media figures out you were there that night, they are going to swarm. They'll find Sarah Chen. They'll harass her. They'll turn this entire situation into a spectacle." Michael knew Marcus was right, but he also knew he couldn't walk away now. Sarah was making progress, real progress, and he couldn't abandon her just because things might get complicated. "Double the security," Michael said firmly, "and have our legal team prepare statements if needed. But I'm not walking away from this. I'm not leaving her alone." Marcus and Patricia exchanged worried glances but nodded. They had learned long ago that when Michael Jackson made up his mind about something, especially something involving helping others, there was no changing it. What none of them knew was that the story was about to explode in ways they couldn't possibly imagine, and Michael's secret involvement was about to become very public very quickly. 4 months after that rainy November night, Sarah Chen walked out of the Serenity Hills Treatment Center in Malibu with clear eyes and steady hands. She had been clean for 123 days, the longest stretch of sobriety she had achieved in 3 years. Dr. Williams met her at the entrance, proud of how far she had come. She had confronted her trauma, processed her pain, and learned coping mechanisms to deal with the cravings that still crept up on her in weak moments. But most importantly, she had found something she thought she had lost forever: hope. During her treatment, Dr. Williams had told her about her mysterious benefactor. Someone who wished to remain anonymous had paid for her entire stay at Serenity Hills, a facility that cost thousands of dollars per week. This same person had arranged for her to have private therapy sessions, art therapy, music therapy, and even horseback riding lessons as part of her healing process. Sarah had cried when she learned this, overwhelmed by the generosity of someone she had never met. "Why would anyone do this for me?" she had asked Dr. Williams. "Because someone believes you deserve a second chance," he had replied simply. Now, standing in the California sunshine, Sarah felt like a different person than the broken girl who had collapsed on that rain-soaked sidewalk. She had gained weight, her skin glowed with health, and most importantly, she had reconnected with a sense of purpose. During therapy, she had rediscovered her passion for painting, something she had abandoned when the drugs took over her life. The treatment center walls were now decorated with her artwork, vibrant pieces full of color and life that reflected her journey from darkness into light. But Sarah couldn't shake her obsession with finding the person who had saved her that night. Her memories of those moments were fragmented and dreamlike, but certain images remained crystal clear. She remembered the rain, the cold pavement, and then someone lifting her head gently, breathing into her mouth, pressing rhythmically on her chest. She remembered opening her eyes and seeing a face above her, features obscured by rain and darkness, but somehow radiating kindness and determination. She remembered feeling safe for the first time in years. Dr. Williams had advised her to let it go, to focus on her recovery rather than pursuing ghosts from that night. But Sarah needed to know. She needed to thank the person who had given her this second chance at life. So she began investigating on her own, starting with a few facts she knew. The paramedics had told her that a concerned citizen had found her and performed CPR. The police report was similarly vague, mentioning only that an unnamed witness had called for help. But Sarah was determined. She spent hours at the public library, searching through newspaper archives and online forums. She found the articles about the mystery Good Samaritan and began following every thread she could find. One forum user had posted about seeing an expensive black SUV near the scene. Another had claimed that their friend who worked at a nearby convenience store had seen something unusual that night, but wouldn't talk about it. Sarah contacted everyone she could find, piecing together tiny fragments of information like a detective solving a cold case. Then, one afternoon in March, Sarah made a breakthrough. She found a small article in a local community newspaper that mentioned the incident in passing. The article was brief, just a few paragraphs, but it included one crucial detail that other sources had missed. The writer mentioned that a local business owner had reviewed his security camera footage from that night and had seen something interesting, though he declined to say what. Sarah immediately tracked down the business, a small electronics repair shop on Wilshire Boulevard. The owner, an elderly Korean man named Mr. Kim, was initially reluctant to talk to her. But when Sarah explained that she was a woman who had been saved that night, his expression softened. "You look so different," he said, studying her healthy face. "That night, I thought you were dead." Sarah nodded. "I almost was. Please, Mr. Kim, if you have any information about who helped me, I need to know. I need to thank them." Mr. Kim disappeared into his back room and returned with a USB drive. "The police never asked for my footage, and I never volunteered it. What you do with this is your choice." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the drive home to her small studio apartment, another gift from her anonymous benefactor. She plugged it into her laptop and opened the file. The video was grainy and dark, the rain obscuring much of the detail, but it was enough. She watched as an expensive SUV pulled up to the curb. She watched as 3 figures emerged from a vehicle. She watched as one of them, tall and slender, rushed toward her fallen body. The camera angle wasn't perfect, and the rain made identification difficult. But Sarah could see the person kneeling beside her, working frantically to save her life. She watched the video over and over, zooming in, trying to catch any detail that might reveal her savior's identity. There was something familiar about the person's movements, something she couldn't quite place. Then, in one frame where the person turned slightly toward the camera, Sarah saw it. The street light caught the side of his face for just a fraction of a second, and even through the rain and darkness, she recognized him. Her hand flew to her mouth as she gasped in disbelief. It was Michael Jackson. The king of pop, the most famous entertainer in the world, had been the one kneeling in the rain, breathing life back into her lungs. Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. It seemed impossible, absurd even. Why would Michael Jackson be driving through Los Angeles at 3 a.m? Why would he have stopped to help a stranger? Why would he have risked his safety and reputation to save someone like her? But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The expensive treatment facility, the anonymous generosity, the insistence on privacy. It had been him all along. Sarah knew what she had to do, but she also understood the implications. If she went public with this information, it would become a media sensation. Michael Jackson's life would be invaded yet again, and the beautiful, pure gesture he had made would be twisted and analyzed and dissected by millions of people. She thought about Dr. Williams' words about respecting her benefactor's wish for anonymity. She thought about how much Michael had already done for her, asking nothing in return. But Sarah also knew that some truths demanded to be told, not for fame or recognition, but because they mattered. The world needed to know that one of the most famous people on earth had knelt in the rain to save someone society had written off as worthless. The world needed to know that Michael Jackson, despite all his own struggles and pain, had chosen compassion over convenience, courage over caution. This story wasn't just about her being saved. It was about humanity, about the connections that bind us all together, about the power of one person choosing to care. Sarah made a copy of the video and spent the next week trying to figure out how to reach Michael Jackson. She couldn't just call his publicist or show up at his gates. She needed to do this right, to give him the option to be part of telling this story or to let her tell it alone. Finally, she contacted Dr. Williams and asked him to arrange a meeting. "Please," she begged. "I know it was him. I know he's the one who saved me and paid for everything. I just want to say thank you, and I want to ask his permission to share what he did." Dr. Williams was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I can't confirm or deny anything, Sarah, but I will make a phone call. What happens after that is not up to me." 2 days later, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. It was Patricia, Michael's assistant. She looked Sarah over carefully, evaluating her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Mr. Jackson has agreed to meet with you," Patricia said, "tomorrow afternoon at a location that will be disclosed to you 1 hour before the meeting. You will come alone, and you will not tell anyone where you're going. These terms are non-negotiable." Sarah agreed immediately, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow, she would finally meet the angel who had saved her life. Tomorrow, she would look into the eyes of Michael Jackson and tell him that his act of courage had given her a reason to live. Tomorrow, everything would change, for both of them, in ways neither could possibly predict. The location turned out to be a private recording studio in Encino, far from the main roads and hidden behind high walls and dense trees. Patricia picked up Sarah personally, driving in circles for 30 minutes to ensure they weren't being followed before finally pulling through the security gates. Sarah's stomach churned with nerves as they walked through a side entrance and down a long corridor lined with gold and platinum records. The walls told the story of a career that had revolutionized music itself, and Sarah felt suddenly small and insignificant in the presence of such extraordinary achievement. Patricia led her to a small, comfortable room with soft lighting and acoustic panels on the walls. "Wait here," she instructed, then left Sarah alone with her thoughts. The minutes stretched out endlessly. Sarah paced the room, rehearsing what she wanted to say, then abandoning her mental script because nothing felt adequate. How do you thank someone for giving you your life back? How do you express gratitude for the kind of selfless compassion that most people only read about in stories? She was still pacing when the door opened quietly behind her. Sarah turned around, and there he was, Michael Jackson stood in the doorway, looking somehow both exactly like his photos and completely different in person. He wore simple black pants and a red button-down shirt, his signature fedora absent, his famous curls falling naturally around his face. But it was his eyes that struck her most powerfully. They were gentle and sad and kind, eyes that had seen too much pain but refused to become hardened by it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, two souls connected by a moment of crisis that had changed them both forever. "Sarah," Michael said softly, and his voice was gentle, musical even in normal speech. "It's good to see you looking so healthy." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes immediately. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, but hearing him say her name undid all her resolve. "It's really you," she whispered. "I wasn't completely sure until this moment, but it's really you." Michael smiled, a shy, genuine expression that transformed his face. "Yes, it's really me. Though I have to say, you're taking this much more calmly than I expected." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I've had time to prepare. I found the security footage from that night. I've known for a week that you were the one who saved me." Michael's smile faded slightly. "You found footage? Does anyone else know about it?" Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, I swear. Just me. The store owner who gave it to me has no idea who you are. He never really looked at it closely. I haven't shown it to anyone or told anyone about it. I wanted to talk to you first, to thank you, and to ask what you wanted me to do with this information." Michael walked further into the room and gestured to a comfortable sofa. "Please, sit. We have a lot to talk about." They sat down, and for the next hour, Sarah poured out her story. She told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about the sexual assault in college that had shattered her sense of safety, about how she had turned to drugs to numb the pain, about the downward spiral that had nearly killed her. She told him about waking up in the hospital, about Dr. Williams in the treatment center, about discovering her passion for painting again. She told him about the slow, painful process of learning to live with her trauma instead of running from it. Michael listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. When she finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story. I know how hard it is to share our deepest pain with others. I know what it's like to feel broken and lost and like the world is too big and too cruel to survive." His voice cracked slightly, and Sarah realized with a start that Michael Jackson, the most famous entertainer alive, understood her pain not just intellectually but personally. "That night," Michael continued, "I was exhausted and overwhelmed. I had spent hours in the studio, trying to create something perfect, trying to live up to everyone's expectations. I just wanted to go home and disappear for a while. But then I saw you lying there in the rain, and something shifted inside me. In that moment, none of my problems mattered. None of my fame or fortune or success meant anything. The only thing that mattered was making sure you kept breathing." He paused, his eyes growing distant. "You have to understand. Sarah, I'm used to being a symbol. I'm the king of pop, the superstar, the icon. But that night, I wasn't any of those things. I was just a human being trying to help another human being. It felt real in a way nothing in my life feels real anymore." Sarah reached out and took his hand impulsively. "You saved my life, Michael. Not just physically, though you did that too, but you saved my soul. When I woke up in that hospital and learned that someone had cared enough to stop, to help, to pay for my treatment without wanting anything in return, it changed how I saw the world. It changed how I saw myself. You made me believe I was worth saving." Michael squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You were always worth saving, Sarah. Every human life has value, even when we can't see it ourselves." They talked for hours, sharing stories about pain and healing, about the difficulty of living in a world that often felt hostile and unforgiving. Michael told her things he rarely shared with anyone, about his lonely childhood, about the pressure of fame, about the constant scrutiny and criticism that wore away at his spirit. Sarah told him about her painting, about how art had become her way of processing trauma and expressing emotions she couldn't put into words. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both of them were survivors. Both of them were fighters. Both of them understood what it meant to keep going even when giving up seemed easier. Finally, they came to the question that hung between them. "What do you want to do about the video?" Michael asked, "What do you want to do about this story?" Sarah had thought about this constantly for the past week. "I want to tell people what you did," she said honestly. "Not for attention, not to invade your privacy, but because the world needs to know. They need to know that you're not just a superstar, you're a human being with a huge heart. They need to know that you risked everything to save someone you didn't even know. But I won't do it without your permission. This is your story too." Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the California evening. He was silent for so long that Sarah began to worry she had upset him. Then he turned back to her, his decision made. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll tell the story together. But we do it on our terms, in our way. We don't let the media turn this into a circus. We control the narrative." Sarah nodded eagerly. "How do we do that?" Michael smiled, and this time there was something determined in his expression, something strong and unbreakable. "We do it the way I've always done my best work. We create something beautiful, something that matters." Over the next 2 hours, they planned everything carefully. They would release the story through a reputable news outlet, accompanied by the security footage and interviews with both of them. Dr. Williams would provide professional context about addiction and recovery. The focus would be on hope, on second chances, on the power of compassion. It would be Sarah's story of survival, with Michael's role as just one part of a larger narrative about human connection and healing. As the meeting drew to a close, Sarah stood to leave. She felt lighter than she had in years, as if sharing her story with Michael had lifted a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying. But before she reached the door, Michael called out to her, "Sarah, wait. There's something else I want to give you." He disappeared for a moment and returned with a canvas, wrapped carefully in protective paper. "I paint too," he said with a shy smile. "Not many people know that. I made this for you last week, after Dr. Williams told me you wanted to meet. I hope you like it." Sarah carefully unwrapped the canvas and gasped. It was an abstract piece, full of swirling blues and silvers that suggested rain, with a bright golden light emerging from the center. In the bottom corner, in Michael's distinctive handwriting, were the words "from darkness into light." Sarah looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Michael hugged her gently, and for a moment they just stood there, two people who had saved each other in different ways, connected by fate and compassion and the simple, powerful choice to care. The story broke on a Monday morning in late April, and within hours it had spread across every news outlet in the world. Michael Jackson's Secret, the night the king of pop saved a life, read one headline. Exclusive, the untold story of Michael Jackson's hidden heroism proclaimed another. The interviews, carefully crafted and deeply moving, show both Michael and Sarah speaking honestly about that rainy November night and everything that had followed. The security camera footage, grainy but undeniable, proved that the story was true. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with responses, and for once, the majority of comments were positive, even reverent. People who had spent years criticizing Michael Jackson suddenly saw him in a new light. "This is the real Michael," one person wrote. "This is who has always been underneath all the fame and controversy." Another comment read, "He didn't have to stop. He didn't have to help. He could have driven past like most people would have, but he chose compassion over convenience. That's what makes him extraordinary." But the story resonated most powerfully with people struggling with their own battles. Within days, Sarah's email and social media accounts were flooded with messages from people in recovery, people battling addiction, people who had survived trauma and were fighting to rebuild their lives. They thanked her for being brave enough to share her story. They told her she had given them hope when they had none left. Many of them shared their own stories of darkness and recovery, creating a wave of connection and solidarity that grew stronger each day. Michael's representatives were initially terrified of how the story might be twisted or sensationalized, but even the typically cynical entertainment media seemed genuinely moved by what had happened. Major news networks requested interviews, and Michael agreed to a few carefully selected appearances. On one memorable evening, he sat down with a respected journalist and spoke more openly than he had in years about his motivations, his values, and his belief in the fundamental goodness of humanity. "I've been blessed with extraordinary success," Michael told the interviewer, his voice steady and sincere. "I've had opportunities most people only dream about. But success doesn't mean anything if we don't use it to help others." That night, I wasn't thinking about my career or my reputation. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped. That's all. That's what any decent person should do. The interviewer pressed him on the decision to remain anonymous for so long. Michael smiled sadly. "I've learned that sometimes good deeds get contaminated by fame. People start questioning your motives, suggesting you did it for publicity. I didn't want that. I just wanted Sarah to have a chance at recovery without the media circus that follows me everywhere." Sarah also did several interviews, and her transformation became part of the story's power. News programs showed before and after photos. The difference stark and inspiring. The broken young woman from the rainy sidewalk had become a confident artist with clear eyes and genuine hope for the future. She spoke eloquently about addiction, about trauma, about the long road to recovery. She became an advocate, partnering with treatment centers and speaking at schools about the dangers of drug abuse and the possibility of healing. 3 months after the story broke, Sarah held her first art exhibition at a small gallery in Los Angeles. Michael attended privately, arriving after the official opening to avoid overwhelming the event with his presence. He walked slowly through the gallery, studying each painting carefully. Sarah's work was raw and emotional, dealing honestly with themes of pain, addiction, survival, and hope. One painting in particular caught his attention. It showed a figure lying on dark pavement in the rain, with another figure kneeling beside them, surrounded by light. The painting was titled Angel in the Rain. "It's how I remember it," Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside him. "Maybe the memory isn't perfectly accurate, but this is how it felt, like an angel appeared in my darkest moment." Michael studied the painting in silence, visibly moved. "You have real talent. Sarah, this is extraordinary." She smiled. "I learned from the best. Your painting hangs in my apartment, and I look at it every morning when I wake up. It reminds me that I came from darkness into light, and I can never go back." The exhibition was a success, with several pieces selling to collectors who had heard Sarah's story. But more importantly, it established her as a serious artist with something meaningful to say. She began receiving commissions and invitations to show her work at other galleries. Her life, which had seemed over just a year earlier, was beginning anew with purpose and direction. And through it all, Michael remained a quiet supporter, checking in regularly, celebrating her victories, and offering encouragement during her struggles. But the story's impact extended far beyond just Sarah and Michael. Treatment centers across the country reported a significant increase in people seeking help for addiction. Sarah's message that recovery was possible, combined with Michael's demonstration of compassion, had inspired thousands of people to take that terrifying first step toward getting clean. Support groups formed online, using the phrase "angel in the rain" as their rallying cry. People shared their own stories of hitting bottom and finding hope, creating community of survivors helping survivors. The story also changed how many people viewed Michael Jackson. For years, his life had been defined by tabloid headlines, legal troubles, and speculation about his personal life. The constant scrutiny had taken a terrible toll on his mental health and his reputation. But this story showed a different side of him, the side his close friends and family had always known. It showed his genuine kindness, his deep empathy, his willingness to put others before himself. It reminded the world that beneath the fame and controversy was a human being with a heart full of compassion. Michael and Sarah's friendship deepened over the following months. They would meet regularly at the recording studio or at Sarah's apartment, talking for hours about art, music, philosophy, and life. Michael found in Sarah someone who understood what it meant to be judged harshly by the world, someone who had also experienced the pain of having people see only the surface without understanding the complexity beneath. Sarah found in Michael a mentor and friend who believed in her potential, even when she doubted herself. One evening in early autumn, almost a year after that fateful November night, they sat together in Michael's private garden watching the sunset. The air was warm and fragrant with jasmine, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. "You know what's strange?" Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "That night was the worst night of my life and the best night of my life all at once. I nearly died, but I also finally started living. Does that make sense?" Michael nodded slowly. "Perfect sense. Sometimes we have to hit absolute bottom before we can begin to climb back up. Sometimes the worst moments contain the seeds of our greatest transformations. Sarah turned to look at him, her expression serious. Can I ask you something personal? Michael gestured for her to continue. That night, when you saw me lying there, you could have just called for help and driven away. You could have let the paramedics handle it. But you didn't. You got out of the car. You knelt in the rain. You saved my life with your own hands. Why? What made you do that? Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. I think, he said slowly, that we all carry pain inside us. Some people's pain is visible, like yours was at night. Some people's pain is hidden, like mine has been for most of my life. But when I saw you lying there, I recognized something of myself in you. I saw someone who was hurting so badly that continuing to feel it seemed impossible. I've had moments like that, Sarah, moments where the weight of everything felt unbearable. And in those moments, I've been lucky enough to have people who reached out to me, who reminded me that I wasn't alone. I just wanted to do the same for you. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. You've given me so much more than you know. Not just my physical life, but a reason to want to live it. Before that night, I felt like I didn't matter. I felt like the world would be better off without me. But you showed me that I was wrong. You showed me that strangers can care, that compassion is real, that every life has value. She reached out and took his hand. You're my hero, Michael. Not because you're famous or talented, but because you're good. You're genuinely, deeply good, and that's rarer than any amount of fame or success. Michael squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening with emotion. And you're my inspiration, Sarah. Watching you fight for your recovery, watching you rebuild your life from nothing, watching you turn your pain into art that moves people. That's been one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. You remind me why I do what I do, why I keep going despite everything. You remind me that one person really can make a difference in another person's life, and that's all that really matters in the end. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people from completely different worlds, brought together by fate and circumstance, connected by a moment of crisis that had revealed the best in both of them. Sarah thought about how different her life was now compared to a year ago. She had a career she loved, friendships that sustained her, purpose that drove her forward each day. She was clean, healthy, and most importantly, she wanted to stay that way. Michael thought about how this experience had changed him as well. Saving Sarah's life had reminded him of his own humanity, his own capacity for direct, meaningful action. So much of his life was abstract, filtered through handlers and publicists and corporate machinery. But kneeling on that rainy sidewalk, breathing life into Sarah's lungs, he had been just a man helping another human being. It had been real and immediate and pure in a way nothing else in his life was anymore. It had reminded him why he cared so deeply about humanitarian causes, why he donated millions to children's hospitals and disaster relief. It had reminded him that fame and fortune meant nothing if they didn't serve a higher purpose. In the months and years that followed, both Michael and Sarah continued to use their story to inspire others. Sarah became a sought-after speaker on addiction and recovery, her artwork gaining recognition in galleries around the world. She established a foundation that provided scholarship for art therapy programs in treatment centers, helping other people use creative expression as a tool for healing. Michael continued his charitable work with renewed vigor, inspired by seeing the direct impact one person could have on another's life. Their story became legendary, retold countless times as an example of compassion in action. But for Michael and Sarah themselves, it remained deeply personal, a bond forged in the most desperate of circumstances and strengthened through mutual respect and genuine friendship. They had saved each other in different ways. Michael had saved Sarah's life that rainy November night, and Sarah had saved Michael's faith in humanity, reminding him that his actions mattered, that kindness rippled outward in ways we can never fully measure, that being good was its own reward. On the first anniversary of that fateful night, they met at the spot on Wilshire Boulevard where it had all happened. The street looked so different in daylight, so ordinary. It was hard to believe this unremarkable stretch of pavement had been the site of such a transformative moment. Sarah placed flowers on the spot where she had collapsed. A memorial to the person I used to be, she explained. A reminder how far I've come. Michael stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You know what the most beautiful part of this whole story is?" Sarah asked. "It's not that you're Michael Jackson and you saved my life. It's that you didn't have to be Michael Jackson to do what you did. Anyone could have stopped that night. Anyone could have called for help, performed CPR, made sure I survived. But most people wouldn't have. Most people would have driven past, telling themselves it wasn't their problem, that someone else would handle it. You chose differently. You chose to be the someone who helped. And that choice, that simple human choice to care about a stranger, that's what changed everything." Michael smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and softened his whole face. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this. We all have the capacity to be someone's angel in the rain. We all have opportunities every single day to choose compassion over convenience, to choose helping over ignoring, to choose love over fear. I was just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, and brave enough to listen to what my heart was telling me to do. He paused, looking at Sarah with deep affection. "But you were brave too, Sarah. You fought for your recovery. You chose to live. You turned your second chance into something meaningful. That took just as much courage as anything I did." As they stood together on that ordinary street corner, two extraordinary people connected by an extraordinary moment, they both understood that their story was bigger than either of them individually. It was a story about the best of what humanity could be. It was a story about the power of one person choosing to care and another person choosing to survive. It was a story about how our darkest moments can become the foundation for our greatest transformations. It was a story about love, not romantic love, but the deep, abiding love that says every human life matters, every person deserves dignity, every soul is worth saving. The story of that November night will be told and retold for years to come. It would inspire movies and books, songs, and paintings. It will be cited in treatment centers and recovery meetings as proof that hope is real, that change is possible, that we are never truly alone. But the most important part of the story wasn't its public impact or its cultural significance. The most important part was that two people found each other in the darkness, and together they found their way back to the light. The most important part was that when Michael Jackson had the choice to keep driving or to stop and help, he chose compassion. And that choice saved two lives that night, Sarah's life and, in a way, his own soul. Years later, when people would ask Michael about his greatest achievement, he wouldn't talk about his record-breaking albums or his revolutionary music videos or his unprecedented fame. He would talk about a rainy night in November when he knelt on a cold sidewalk and breathed life into a dying stranger. He would talk about Sarah Chen, the young woman who nearly gave up on life but found the strength to keep fighting. He would talk about how saving her life had reminded him of his own humanity, his own capacity for direct, meaningful good in a world that often felt overwhelming and cruel. And Sarah, when asked about her greatest inspiration, wouldn't talk about famous artists or prestigious galleries or critical acclaim. She would talk about an angel in the rain who appeared when she needed him most, who refused to let her die, who believed she was worth saving even when she didn't believe it herself. She would talk about Michael Jackson, not as the king of pop, but as a man who showed her that compassion is real, that strangers can care, that every life has purpose and value and meaning. Their story became a testament to the power of one moment to change everything. It became proof that fame and success are meaningless unless they serve something larger than ourselves. It became evidence that the simple act of choosing to care, choosing to help, choosing to see the humanity in others, can ripple outward in ways we can never fully comprehend. It became a reminder that we are all connected, that we all have the capacity to be someone's hero, that love and compassion are not weaknesses but the greatest strengths we possess. And on quiet evenings, when the world grew still and the weight of their respective challenges felt heavy, both Michael and Sarah would think back to that rainy November night. They would remember the cold pavement, the sound of sirens, the moment when death seemed certain and then suddenly wasn't. They would remember the instant when two lives intersected, when fate and choice combined to create something beautiful from something terrible. They would remember that night as the beginning of everything that came after, the foundation upon which they built new lives full of purpose and meaning. The secret was finally revealed, not because it had to be, but because both of them understood that some stories are too important to keep hidden. Some truths need to be shared because they remind us of what really matters. Some moments of grace and compassion need to be celebrated because they inspire others to choose goodness over indifference, love over fear, action over paralysis. Michael Jackson had risked his life and his reputation to save a stranger, and in doing so, he had proven that beneath all the fame and controversy and complication, he was exactly what he had always claimed to be, someone who cared deeply about others, someone who believed in the fundamental goodness of humanity, someone who understood that we are all in this together, and that the only way forward is through compassion, love, and the simple, profound choice to help each other survive.